The sun had barely risen over the coastline when Evelyn Harper stepped off the modest bus that had dropped her near the gates of the illustrious Marlow Grand Resort. Dressed in a simple black dress and worn leather sandals, she held a small canvas handbag with both hands. Her silver hair was tied back in a low bun, and her pale blue eyes held a soft, observant calm. The grand entrance to the resort towered before her. Marble statues lined the gates. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze. Luxury vehicles dotted the curved driveway. The kind of place where people didn't arrive on foot and certainly not carrying their own bags. Evelyn paused briefly, taking in the sight. She was here not for leisure, but for a quiet reason that mattered only to her. A memorial was being held that evening for her late husband, Charles Harper, a man known by many in the business world for his philanthropy, though he had always been more private than public. Their son, Christopher, had arranged the event to honour his father's legacy, booking the entire coastal wing of the Marlow. Evelyn walked slowly toward the main entrance. The lobby shimmered with gold accents and polished stone floors. Guests lounged in designer resort wear, sipping cocktails even before noon. A hostess near the front desk spotted Evelyn and hesitated. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone polite but guarded. "This area is for resort guests only. Are you looking for the staff entrance?" Evelyn offered a kind smile. "No, dear, I have a reservation. The Harper Memorial is scheduled for this evening." The hostess blinked. "You're with the Harper Group?" Evelyn nodded. Before the woman could respond, a sharply dressed man stepped in. He wore a navy blazer with a golden pin on the lapel. His name tag read, "Evan Langford, Guest Relations Manager." "Is there a problem?" he asked, glancing at Evelyn's shoes and then her face. "She claims she's with the Harper Group," the hostess said in a whisper she didn't hide well. Evan gave Evelyn a brief, sceptical smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "The Harper party includes high-profile guests. We can't allow unauthorized individuals into restricted areas. I'll have someone help you find the correct entrance for vendors or staff." "I'm not staff," Evelyn said gently. Evan raised a brow. "Then perhaps you've misunderstood the event. The Harper Memorial is by private invitation only." Evelyn remained still, her expression calm. "I understand," but she didn't turn around. She had been underestimated before, many times, and she had learned long ago that silence often held more power than protest. She looked past Evan toward the sea in the distance. 2 hours. That was all it would take, because her son was coming, and with him, the truth. Evan Langford motioned to a nearby bellhop. "Thomas, please assist this guest to the service area. I believe she may be looking for deliveries or housekeeping." "I don't think that will be necessary," Evelyn replied softly, but Evan had already turned his back. Around them, other guests began to glance over. A woman seated nearby at the piano bar gave Evelyn a long look, then leaned toward her companion and whispered. Laughter followed. A younger couple, clearly influencers from the way they were filming their stay, caught the scene on their phone and chuckled. "This place is so tight on security," the woman said under her breath. "They don't even let random grannies wander around." Evelyn stood quietly, not reacting. She had no desire to prove herself to anyone, but her heart ached, not for her pride, but for how easily people judged what they did not understand. "I'll wait just outside then," she said calmly, taking a few steps towards the exit. Evan didn't offer her a seat. He didn't apologize. He merely adjusted the collar of his shirt and turned his attention back to a well-dressed guest who had just arrived in a white convertible. Evelyn sat down outside on a stone bench in the shade, facing the beach. 2 hours, she reminded herself. 2 hours, and everything would look different. As she watched the waves, her thoughts drifted to Charles. He had never cared much for appearances. He wore the same grey cardigan for 20 years, even when he became one of the most respected investors in the region. Their son, Christopher, had inherited his father's brilliance and his mother's humility, but unlike his parents, he had chosen the spotlight, turning their family name into a global brand. Even so, he had never forgotten where he came from, especially not his mother. Inside the resort, Evan made a quick call. "Yes, I handled it. Some older woman claiming to be part of the Harper party. No ID, no reservation in the system. Dressed like she came off a bus. I sent her around back." He laughed lightly. "These types show up, hoping to sneak into high-profile events. Happens every time we host a gala." At that moment, a young receptionist hesitated near the desk. "Sir, should we double-check the guest list?" Evan waved her off. "Trust me. The Harpers arrive by private car or helicopter, not on foot. I've worked too many of these events. I know how they move." He didn't know. Not this time, because this time the person they had dismissed wasn't trying to get into the Harper party. She was the Harper they had been waiting for. Evelyn Harper sat calmly on the stone bench, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The ocean breeze ruffled the edges of her black shawl, but she remained still, as if rooted to the very earth beneath her. She watched the horizon with quiet anticipation. At exactly 1:42 p.m., she pulled out a slim silver phone from her handbag. It was old by modern standards and slightly scratched, but functional. She typed a brief message. "Protocol Blue, Peninsula Resort, 2 hours." She hit send. 3 minutes later, a secure reply flashed back. "Understood. Arrival in 87 minutes. Executing visibility protocol." Evelyn tucked the phone away and closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. This wasn't the first time she'd been mistaken for someone she wasn't. After Charles died, she had intentionally simplified her life. No more stylists, no more security details, no more headlines. She wanted space to grieve, to walk anonymously through markets and bookstores. She didn't need people to remember her name, but they should have remembered her kindness. Especially Evan Langford. Inside the resort, the gala team was in chaos. Someone had accidentally overbooked the main dining hall, and the VIP floral arrangements were missing. Evan barked orders, his voice growing sharper by the minute. "Get the champagne tower right this time," he snapped at a waiter. "And where is the updated guest list? The Harpers are the reason this entire gala is happening." A junior concierge, nervous and sweating, handed him a fresh list. Evan scanned it, searching for the name he expected. Christopher Harper, confirmed. Dock arrival, 3:30 p.m., accompanied by one guest. Evan exhaled. At least the centerpiece of the event was still intact. The billionaire entrepreneur, founder of the Harper Initiative, arriving on his 250-foot yacht, the Sea Light, just in time to address the press and donors. He turned to the receptionist again. "Double security on the dock. I don't want any media or random tourists swarming Mr. Harper. This isn't a public beach." Outside, Evelyn finished her tea. The waiter at the beachfront cafe had offered to bring her something sweet, but she politely declined. She didn't need sugar. She was waiting for something far more satisfying. As the minutes passed, whispers continued in the lobby. A few staff members had started to wonder if Evan had made a mistake. Someone even asked, "What if that woman really was someone important?" But Evan scoffed. "Please, I can spot status from a mile away." He couldn't, and in just over an hour the ocean itself would carry the truth to his doorstep. The sun had shifted lower in the sky, casting long golden beams over the horizon when the first onlookers at the Peninsula Resort spotted it. A sleek silhouette emerged beyond the waves. At first it seemed like a mirage. But then, as the vessel drew nearer, gasps spread through the small crowd gathered near the private marina. "The Sea Light," someone whispered, their voice trembling with recognition. There was no mistaking the yacht. At 250 feet, it sliced through the ocean like a living sculpture. Its silver hull gleamed under the afternoon sun, and atop its deck, a navy blue flag embroidered with the Harper Foundation's insignia snapped crisply in the breeze. Back at the front desk, Evan was adjusting his tie when his walkie crackled to life. "Sir, we've got visual confirmation the Sea Light is arriving. Dock ETA is 20 minutes. "Perfect," Evan replied, straightening up with rehearsed charm. "Alert all VIP staff. I'll meet them at the dock." He grabbed a bottle of imported champagne from the fridge behind the reception and summoned 2 hostesses to carry it in a crystal tray. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from excitement. This was the moment that would define his career. He didn't know it yet, but it would. Meanwhile, on the promenade overlooking the water, Evelyn remained seated. She could see the yacht approaching, could feel the subtle shift in the air as bystanders paused to take pictures, as resort staff hurried toward the marina with urgent steps and bright smiles. She rose slowly, brushing a speck of sand from her long skirt. She didn't need to rush. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. She walked the long path along the beachside walkway, her pace deliberate. As she reached the end of the path, a black SUV pulled up beside her, almost silently. The driver's window rolled down. "Ma'am," the man in the driver's seat said with a gentle nod. "Mr. Harper instructed us to bring you directly to the dock. He's on deck." Evelyn smiled. "Thank you, James. Let's give them something to talk about." As the car eased forward toward the private marina entrance, resort staff stepped back instinctively. The tinted vehicle moved slowly, gliding through the exclusive access gate that no one had thought she'd ever pass through again. At the edge of the dock, Evan Phillips was already positioned perfectly. He wore a tailored suit and a manufactured smile, ready to greet a billionaire. But as the black SUV rolled to a stop, his smile began to falter. The driver stepped out and opened the back door, and out stepped Evelyn Harper, not in a designer gown or a velvet shawl, but in the same black dress, still simple, still dignified. Only now the entire world was watching. For a split second, the entire dock seemed frozen in time. The murmurs stopped, the champagne flutes trembled slightly in the hands of the staff. Resort guests who had gathered nearby for the spectacle leaned in closer. Some recognized her immediately. Others whispered, "Isn't that the woman who was kicked out earlier?" Evan took a step forward, confusion warping his face into a tight-lipped smile. "Ma'am, I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Evelyn didn't slow her pace. Her steps were calm, her posture upright. Every inch of her body radiated something different now, not wealth, not power, something deeper, assurance. "I think you've misunderstood quite a lot, Mr. Phillips," she replied gently, her voice carrying across the water like a string pulled taut. Behind her, the gangway to the sea light extended with mechanical precision. Crew members stepped off first, all dressed in crisp white uniforms. Then came the figure who truly silenced the crowd. Daniel Harper, billionaire tech entrepreneur, youngest self-made CEO on the West Coast, and Evelyn's only son. He stepped down the gangway with purpose, his sunglasses tucked into the front pocket of his white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to show the inked coordinates of his childhood home tattooed on his arm. "Mum," he said warmly, embracing her in full view of everyone. Then he turned to Evan, who now looked visibly pale. "You must be the one who called security on my mother," Daniel said, his tone polite but sharp as broken glass. Evan tried to recover. "Sir, I was simply following protocol. She didn't have a reservation. She didn't present proper—" Daniel raised one hand. "You don't recognize the woman who founded the Harper Literacy Trust, the woman who raised 2 kids after her husband died in a factory fire, working 3 jobs to put us through school?" He looked over the heads of the staff to the gathering crowd. "That woman made me who I am. She taught me to read by candlelight when the power got cut. She sold her wedding ring so I could attend coding boot camp." The words landed hard. Evelyn stood motionless beside him. She didn't need to explain herself. Her son's words were painting the full picture. Daniel took a step closer to Evan. "Let me make this very clear," he said quietly. "The only reason we've hosted our family's annual charity gala at this resort for the last 5 years is because my mother chose it. If she tells me we're never coming back, we never come back." Evan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Daniel turned back to Evelyn. "Ready to head inside?" She nodded once. And together mother and son walked past the stunned manager, through the velvet ropes, into the place she'd been rejected from just 2 hours before. But this time she didn't need permission. The grand lobby of the resort, once a stage for Evelyn's humiliation, now served as the backdrop for a far more powerful scene. Guests turned and stared. Some whispered apologies under their breath. A few had the decency to look away in shame. Evelyn walked beside her son without saying a word, her presence speaking louder than anything that could be uttered. Her black dress no longer seemed plain. It looked dignified, graceful, regal even. At the front desk, the same receptionist who had doubted her earlier scrambled to stand. Her hands fumbled at the keyboard as if searching for a way to erase her part in the mistake. "Mrs. Harper," she stammered, "I am so sorry. We didn't realize—" Evelyn gave her a soft smile. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with respect." The young woman looked as if she might cry. Daniel motioned for his assistant, a tall woman in a navy suit, to join them. "Janelle, please ensure my mother is given the finest suite and that the staff has everything she needs for the rest of her stay." "Yes, sir. And Janelle," he added without turning around, "put together a full report on this afternoon. I want to know exactly how my mother was treated, every detail." Evan, the manager, had followed them in, sweating through his suit. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Mr. Harper, Mrs. Harper, please allow me to personally extend my deepest—" Evelyn raised her hand gently. "Mr. Phillips, there's no need, but I insist." "No," she said, more firmly. "You see, I don't need an apology. I've lived through much worse than a moment of arrogance." Her voice was quiet, but it carried like a bell through the hushed lobby. Daniel stepped beside her. "However, there is something you can do, Mr. Phillips. As of this moment, the Harper Foundation will be donating $1 million to establish a hospitality scholarship for low-income students. It will be administered here at this resort." Evan blinked. "You will personally oversee its implementation," Daniel added, "and you will report directly to my mother." Evelyn tilted her head. "That is, if you are still interested in being part of this place after today." Evan nodded quickly, eyes wide. "Of course, absolutely. I'll do whatever's needed." "Good," she said with a nod. "Then we'll consider this moment educational." With that, Evelyn turned and took her son's arm. They walked together through the lobby, past designer-dressed guests and ashamed staff, into the elevator that would take them to the presidential suite. As the doors closed behind them, Daniel smiled at her. "You handled that better than I ever could." Evelyn squeezed his arm gently. "Sometimes you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to stand tall and wait for the right moment." Downstairs, the staff scrambled. But upstairs, a mother finally rested in the place she had been told she didn't belong. Only now the entire building knew better. That evening, the resort's grand ballroom glittered under 1,000 crystal lights. The annual gala, once centered around corporate donors and shallow praise, had taken on a different tone. Word had quietly spread about what had happened that afternoon, though no one dared mention it aloud. The staff were on edge, determined not to make a second mistake. Guests, dressed in their finest gowns and tuxedos, mingled with cocktails in hand, their smiles more polite than genuine. But there was one name on everyone's lips, whether they said it or not: Evelyn Harper. When she entered the ballroom, escorted by her son, conversations paused. People turned, some stepped aside instinctively, others offered respectful nods. Evelyn did not walk with the confidence of someone who demanded attention. She simply moved with the grace of someone who had earned it. Her black gown had been replaced with a deep blue velvet ensemble, simple but elegant, paired with a string of pearls. Daniel walked beside her proudly, no longer the towering CEO, but simply a son honoring his mother. They were soon greeted by the event coordinator, flustered but trying to maintain professionalism. "Mrs. Harper, Mr. Harper," she said with a nervous smile. "Thank you for joining us. The guests have been looking forward to your speech, sir." Daniel looked at his mother, then back at the coordinator. "Actually, my mother will be addressing the audience tonight." There was a pause. The woman hesitated, unsure of how to respond, then nodded quickly. "Of course, right this way." Minutes later, Evelyn stood at the podium. The room dimmed. A spotlight found her. She took a slow breath, surveying the crowd of wealth and privilege before her. "Good evening," she began softly. "I never expected to be standing here tonight. In fact, a few hours ago, I was escorted out of this very resort because I was mistaken for someone who didn't belong." There were soft murmurs in the crowd. "But the truth is, I've spent most of my life in places where people assumed I didn't belong. A widow, a retired librarian, someone without the right dress, the right name, the right connections." She paused. "But none of that ever mattered to my son. He believed in me before anyone else ever did. And tonight he reminded this room of something very important." She leaned forward, her voice still gentle but unwavering. "Respect should never be reserved for those who appear powerful. It should be extended to every person in every room, no matter what they wear, no matter where they come from." There was silence, then slow applause, not thunderous but sincere. Heads nodded. A few guests looked down at their feet, ashamed of earlier thoughts or whispers. Daniel stepped up beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "My mother doesn't just belong here. She defines what belonging means." Together they left the stage, and in that moment Evelyn's quiet dignity did more to transform the atmosphere than any yacht or bank account ever could. The gala continued, but something had shifted. The laughter was softer, the conversations more thoughtful. People approached Evelyn throughout the evening, not out of obligation but with genuine curiosity and respect. One woman, adorned in a silver gown and heavy diamonds, leaned in to whisper, "You reminded me of my own mother. I haven't called her in months. I will tonight." Another guest, a hotel executive from a different chain, shook Evelyn's hand firmly and said, "Thank you. I needed that reminder. We all did." Even Bernard, the once arrogant manager, stood humbly at a distance before finally walking up to her. His shoulders were no longer squared with pride, but lowered in humility. "Mrs. Harper," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I owe you a personal apology. I misjudged you, and I behaved in a way that was Unacceptable. Evelyn met his eyes. Thank you for saying that. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong. I've already reached out to Mr. Harper to see how I can help with the new scholarship program, Bernard added. And I'll be personally funding 2 full scholarships every year for hospitality students. It's the least I can do. Evelyn nodded. That's a start. Let's hope it reaches someone who's been judged unfairly like I was. Bernard lowered his head again, then turned and quietly stepped away. He would not forget this night, and he would not make that mistake again. As the evening came to a close, Evelyn and Daniel stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the marina. The moon hung low over the water, casting silver trails across the gentle waves. The yacht, now resting quietly in the harbour, looked peaceful, almost like it had always belonged there. Daniel exhaled. You handled that better than I ever could have. Evelyn smiled faintly. You know I never needed a yacht to prove anything. I know, he said, but it was nice having it show up at just the right time. She chuckled. Dramatic flair runs in the family, I suppose. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the lights reflect on the waves. Then Evelyn said, Do you know what the best part of today was? Daniel turned to her. What? I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to argue. I just had to be myself. Daniel looked at her with admiration. And that was enough. Later that week, a photo went viral. Evelyn Harper, standing calmly on the dock, with the massive yacht in the background and a stunned Bernard nearby. It was captioned simply, Never judge a book by its cover. And across social media, people began sharing their own stories of being underestimated, of facing quiet discrimination, and of rising above it. The story of the quiet widow who turned a moment of humiliation into one of grace and power had touched hearts far beyond the marble walls of any resort. The next morning, the resort staff lined the main entrance as Evelyn prepared to leave. This time there were no whispers, no side glances, no smirks, just silence and a respectful line of people waiting to say goodbye. She wore the same simple black dress she had arrived in, her small overnight bag in hand. Nothing about her appearance had changed, yet everyone saw her differently now. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The black SUV was ready to take her back to the private airport, where a jet waited, courtesy of one of Daniel's business partners. But before stepping in, Evelyn turned to face the people who had watched her enter this resort with judgment, and leave it with quiet dignity. I want to thank you, she said, her voice soft but firm. Not for the way I was treated, but for the opportunity to show you something. The staff shifted uncomfortably, but they listened to our people like me. We walk into places like this every day and we're invisible, or worse, dismissed because of how we look or what we wear or where we come from. She paused. But dignity doesn't wear labels, it doesn't come with a price tag, and class is not about couture or jewelry. It's about how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you. No one moved. Even the valet attendants, usually busy with arrivals and departures, stood still. Evelyn continued. I was judged before I said a word, but you all learned something, and I hope you remember it. She turned to Bernard, who looked more solemn than anyone else there. Especially you. Bernard nodded once. I will, Mum, I already do. Evelyn stepped into the SUV. Daniel followed, but not before shaking hands with several of the younger staff members and exchanging a few quiet words with Bernard. No cameras, no entourage, just 2 people leaving with more impact than they had arrived with. As the SUV pulled away, Evelyn looked out the window one last time at the resort. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad. She had long accepted that the world often fails to see past surface impressions, but what mattered now was that this place would never be quite the same again. A few days later, the resort announced a new hospitality training initiative inspired by recent events. Guest service training would now include sensitivity sessions, and the Sterling Harper Scholarship Fund would support future hotel staff from underprivileged backgrounds. Evelyn didn't need her name on a plaque. She didn't need recognition. All she needed was the quiet knowledge that a small act of grace, matched with unwavering self-respect, could ripple far beyond a single moment. She had not shouted. She had not fought. She had simply stood tall, walked out, and let the truth follow behind her. And in doing so, she reminded the world that sometimes the softest voice leaves the deepest echo. Back in her quiet home on the edge of the lake, Evelyn sat on the wooden porch swing Daniel had restored years ago. It creaked gently as she swayed, the breeze catching her silver hair and the hem of her linen shawl. The lake shimmered under the late afternoon sun, calm and unbothered, a mirror of the peace she felt inside. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her. It was a message from Daniel. Press is calling it a modern fairy tale, but I just call it Tuesday with Mum. Love you. She smiled. The story had gone viral. Someone from the resort, maybe the woman in the white blazer, had shared the moment when the yacht arrived, when Grace Harper, or rather Evelyn, walked back into the resort not as a stranger, but as the mother of a man who could buy the entire coastline if he wanted. The video had been picked up by morning shows, lifestyle blogs, even a few business networks, but Evelyn had chosen not to give interviews. She didn't want the spotlight. She had lived enough to know that the glow of headlines fades quickly. What mattered more was the quiet conversations now happening in places like that resort. She imagined the staff whispering about how they'd misjudged her. She imagined a manager reconsidering how he speaks to guests. She imagined a young girl watching the clip online and thinking, maybe next time I won't let them make me feel small. That was enough. Her life had been filled with losses, her husband, her old friends, even the version of herself who once questioned her worth. But she had also been given gifts far more valuable than riches. She had been given time, wisdom, and a son who had never forgotten who raised him. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought about the beginning of the story, about the moment she stepped into that resort, hoping only to enjoy a few quiet days and honor a memory. She hadn't expected confrontation. She certainly hadn't planned a lesson in humility. But sometimes life doesn't ask for your permission. It simply hands you a stage and watches what you do with it. Evelyn took a deep breath and whispered to the wind, almost as if her late husband could still hear her. "We did good, didn't we?" A gentle rustle passed through the trees, then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, the kind that feels full of everything unspoken. Moral of the story: never underestimate someone because of their appearance. You never know the journey they've walked or the legacy they carry. True power does not need to announce itself. It simply arrives, calm and unwavering, and sometimes the most elegant form of justice is not revenge, but dignity.